I need Cass. I lost it.
You need 'em?
Yeah. Okay, wait. Okay, here it went. All right. Okay, new computer here, so we're trying to experiment with things. All right. Again, welcome. This is for the March water supply forecast, and we'll get started here. We'll basically kind of follow the same pattern we did. We have the last couple of months. Revisit the soil moisture since that's kind of an impact, of course, to the forecast, the February weather, discuss the current snow situation, and then go over the water supply forecast. And last month we tried to add 2 or 3 slides that kind of dealt with the concept of forecasting, something that impacts the forecast, hopefully explains or describes, I guess, a little bit more detail what we do. And so we kind of have an example about the March-April period. You know, a lot of times we discuss how pivotal that particular period is and how that can really influence the forecast as well as the runoff situation. So we have an example that hopefully you'll find insightful, and then we'll talk about the upcoming weather. The first thing I want to visit here is going to be revisit this is the soil moisture graphic. This hasn't changed. It's the same one that we displayed, basically the soil moisture conditions before the snow started to accumulate in the basins. But it's important to kind of keep in mind where the wet and the dry areas were. The red and orange areas are the below average areas, yellow, green, pretty close to average. And then the darker blue areas are where we were above average going into the winter season. The effect is that those areas that are dry, in particularly parts of the northern Great Basin, Weber, Provo, Bear, and into the severe Virgin and lower Colorado River drainage, that will tend to have a negative effect on water supply forecasts. That will tend to bring them down a little bit. And then in the areas where we have, of course, the dark blue, that's where the soil moisture condition was fairly good going into the winter, and that will have a positive effect by pushing the forecasts up. If you recall, January, we were really dominated by that ridge of high pressure to the west of us. The storms that did move in kind of went way to the north of us, clipped part of the upper Green, clipped part of the upper Colorado, and some of the Gunnison. And then in February, the ridge kind of broke down. We ended up getting into more of a strong zonal west to east upper airflow. That tends to bring frequent storms, a lot more mild and very moist air in this case into the western U.S. So this progressive pattern continued throughout much of April. And especially in early February, we had a really significant transport of moisture into the western United States. You've heard a lot of probably fun meteorological terms this year, polar vortex, things like that. And you know, one of the ones that was used quite a bit in February was atmospheric river. A lot of times, you know, you'll hear pineapple connection or something like that. And basically, that can just be a very focused, strong transport of very moist air into the western states. These actually do form at times around the mid-latitudes. They're really responsible for about 90% of the moisture that comes from the subtropical region, you know, atmospheric moisture that gets transported. So they can quite have a very significant effect and bring very heavy precipitation. And in this case, outside of the West Coast, we did get quite a bit of precipitation in the Green River Basin of Wyoming and parts of northern Utah, southern Wyoming, in the Bear River Basin. You know, in some areas it was quite focused, but this was kind of what developed in early February. There was another one in mid-February that wasn't as strong, but an example of kind of how it looks on satellite is shown here. You can kind of see the fetch of moisture all the way back, kind of towards the Hawaiian Islands and those subtropical regions. So, you know, those can be very large precipitation producers. The result of that was very significant precipitation, to be showing up here momentarily, in the upper Green River Basin, especially the Wyoming range. You know, that slides down to affect parts of the northern Bear River Basin. And also there was pretty good precipitation up along the very high elevations in the upper Yampa River Basin. Uh, some sites over 300% of average for the month of February up in Wyoming. And then, as you moved south, I mean, this flow of very moist air really just favored these extreme northern areas. I mean, we did have some above average precipitation further south to about central Utah, as well as the Gunnison, but then things really dried out again. The San Juan River Basin did not do very well, and the lower Colorado River region again was very dry. So, just continued bad news for the southern third of the basin, and that area kind of in eastern Utah, up along the Green, where it's fairly dry. We're thinking it was probably kind of shadowed by the mountains. This kind of flow, the orographics come into effect quite significantly, so those lower elevation areas didn't fare quite as well either. This next map is a map of the observed precipitation. It's a little different than what I've shown you in the past. This is more of an internal tool, but it's using the same data as the precipitation maps that you can get on our website, but it's a little higher resolution. Eventually we'd kind of like to move to this when we work out a few more bugs and make it a little more friendly for generating images. But it's a little higher resolution, and it shows the distribution of the precipitation, I think, a little bit better than these large hot areas that we use on our web map. And you can see in the Wyoming range, we actually had, I think, 3 or 4 sites that were in that 10 to 14 inch range, and a couple of sites, I believe Tower was one of them, that was also in the 10 to 14 inch range in the upper Yampa. So pretty significant precipitation. The next look is, again, it's the same data, but a little different map than what's on our webpage. But they should pretty much show very similar pattern. And it's the water year precipitation since October. On the left, I have the October through January as a percent of average, and on the right, the October through February as a percent of average. So you can see things kind of continue to dry out in the southern half of our area for the season, and but things in the northern Great Basin region of the Weaver, Provo, Bear, things improved a little bit when you look at the seasonal precipitation, and a little more expansion of the blue areas in the upper Green, and not a great deal of change over in Colorado, but definitely improvement, I think, as you go west of there. This next map I'm going to show, we showed it last month as well, kind of experimental. We've clipped the areas to 7,500 feet. So I'm just showing you the precipitation for the season for the areas above 7,500 feet, which for the April-July period is kind of where the majority of the runoff is going to come from. So it's just a different way of looking at things. Again, seeing pretty significant precipitation in the upper Green. And excuse the scale on the right, that's 150% to 0. That's actually just 150% or greater. These are the bugs we're working out. That's why you don't see this on the web just yet. But this area, this map shows the heavy precip in the upper Green, and in some of those higher areas of some of the upper Colorado River and the Gunnison River. You get down into the San Juan River Basin, though, and even though you do have a few snow sites that are near, and there's a few that are actually a little bit above average in the Animas Basin, it doesn't look as impressive when you look at the seasonal precipitation. So that, another way just to kind of look at the distribution. And as you get further west into the Great Basin, granted things have improved, but you still see areas near average, a lot of areas below average as you move from the Uinta Basin or the Uinta Basin down into the Sevier. Next up, we're going to take a look at the snow. And there's definitely some dramatic changes between early February and early March. We'll look at some of these in a little more detail in a moment. Most notably the upper Green. Many of the snow sites up there are above 175%. of the seasonal average. There's a couple I think near 200%, and some have already exceeded the seasonal peak that doesn't occur until early or mid-April. It's already exceeded the seasonal peak, um, and I think it's 150% on some of them or more, 150, 180. Again, things looking pretty good in the upper Yampa, Colorado River above Cameo. Again, the snowpack is well above average in these areas. And then also extending down into the Gunnison Basin, particularly above Blue Mesa, the snowpack's in pretty good shape. As you drop down the basins into the lower elevations, though, they're a little bit closer to average. Some of them are near average, indicative of kind of the mild temperatures that we've had. We've actually had rain at times up to fairly decent elevations with this mild pattern. We've also seen quite a bit of improvement over the Weber, Bear River, Six Creeks, and the northern slope of the Uintas from February. You see all those kind of yellows and oranges have now turned into greens. So these are around 90 to 110% of the median. I think I said average in the last slide, but I meant median. So these areas have actually improved quite a bit. Water supply forecasts, you'll see they've jumped up in there too, but there's still a soil moisture deficit that's having an impact. But as you move further south, the Virgin River and the lower Colorado River Basin have just essentially been left out. In fact, most of the snow in the Arizona basins is basically gone. There's just minimal amounts in those basins, and the Virgin River Basin has been in southwest Utah has been fairly dry as well. If we take a look at the Green River Basin on this next slide, I want to kind of highlight some of these. It's amazing to look at the 2014 plot. This is the snow water equivalent, and 2014 is in the green, and you can see it just went straight up from these heavy precipitation events, this atmospheric river effect. The median, one as a reminder, the historical median is in purple and the historical average is in blue. They're fairly similar for this time of year. And then 2013 is in the red. That's what occurred last year. So you can see we're well above. Some of these sites are now in their second or third highest on record for this time of year. The Kendall site is 204%. This was as of, I believe, March 5th. I took this 204% for the date, but it's also 178% of median for the season. So it's already that far above the annual seasonal peak. So a very significant snowpack in the upper Green River Basin. Next up is a map that shows the percentiles. If you go to our website down here on the left hand and you click percentiles, it's basically kind of shows you a historical ranking where the current snow water equivalent value falls in the period of record. So if it's in the greater than 90, the dark blue, it's kind of in the top 10%. Most of these records go back. We're getting a pretty good record on some of these, but 25 to 35 years. So if you've got a 30-year record, you're probably in the top 3, and that's the case with a lot of these in the upper Green River Basin above Fontenelle. Several are the second or third highest on record for the date, and a few of them are very close to crossing into the top. So we'll have to watch those as we get more precipitation into that area. These that are in the black, and I've got an example here of Copper Mountain. Was actually, if you look at the green, it's kind of hard to see, but it was at the highest when I took this image a couple days ago. It was the highest for the date. Again, this is just for the current date, so you can see the other years, 2011 and 1996, in the other colors here. We got a lot of snow real late, so a lot to go to catch those years, but at least currently, it's a pretty significant snowpack. Unfortunately, you get down to some of these other areas and in the Severe River Basin, and I don't believe there's a problem with the gauges, but they're definitely on the low end. These are in red, indicating they're amongst the lowest on record. So we've really got quite an opposite scenario going as you move north to south in the basin. The next one is just the snow groups. I didn't include the green here since we kind of discussed it already, but you can see the continued improvement in the Upper Colorado River main stem as a group of all the snow tell sites that have data. We're pretty much near the seasonal peak. It varies from site to site, but as a group, it shows us kind of near the seasonal peak. Gunnison River Basin, just a little bit above the average and the median as a whole. It's a little bit better, a little bit more pronounced when you look at the area above Blue Mesa. It's more like in the 120% of median versus this graph, which is 113. Dolores River Basin, again, a little bit better than last year at this time, and also kind of near the seasonal average or seasonal peak. And in the San Juan Basin, we've had these spurts here and there, but again, it's as a whole, it's kind of near the seasonal as well. But that's mostly due to the Animas River Basin. Once you get over above Navajo, it's not quite as good looking. The next slide will move a little bit west, and should be showing up here in a moment. The next slide here shows the Duchesne River Basin on the upper left. Kind of similar to last year, a little bit better. We did see some increase, but again, it's not doing as well. The Bear River on the upper right, you can see the big rise, so that's very similar to what we saw in the upper green. This area was affected by that heavy precipitation event early in the month. Weaver River drainage is also improved as well. These areas were really hurting, so this is good news to see that. But then as you go down south, I kind of already showed that in the previous map, the Virgin River, Lower Colorado not doing as well. So the next thing I want to show you are the latest water supply forecasts. This is just a more of a map of them, so you can see the distribution of areas that are way above average and areas that are not. And the forecast numbers are listed there. They're all in thousands of acre feet. So for Flaming Gorge, we have 1.4 million acre feet. Some significant increases in the Upper Green River Basin. And increases in most of these northern basins, but particularly in the Upper Green and parts of the Yampa. Looking at some pretty good runoff numbers now. We move further south into the Gunnison and down towards Blue Mesa, Navajo, McPhee. We had some increases in the upper parts of the Gunnison Basin, and I'll show you a trend map here after this, but we had some increases in parts of the upper Gunnison and kind of minor changes, not much change in the lower part. And then the Navajo River, the San Juan River Basin areas, we did drop a little bit, not a lot, but we did drop some, and that's kind of an area that we really need to watch if we see dry weather develop down there. Again, probably some of the other most pronounced changes occurred in the Weber and the Bear River and parts of northern Utah. The reason it's still below average, even though the snow is kind of near average in the Weber, is the soil moisture. It's pulling the guidance down a little bit. So we'll see if we continue to get snow that those Weber, maybe some of the northern Bear River Basin numbers might creep upwards. But that's kind of the explanation for why the Weber is not like up closer to average. Not to ignore the lower Colorado Basin, but I have a couple of, as my map loads, I have some images or an image down here of the lower basin, just indicating the very dry conditions. We're kind of getting to that period of the year where we don't get a lot more storms down in this area, outside of maybe the Verde, but conditions down there with the snow being gone and us getting kind of later into the year, the March through May volumes don't look to be like they're going to be very high this year. The next map is a trend map. It shows the difference between the February 1st and March 1st. It's basically the percent of average of the April-July forecast. So it's the difference in that percent of average between the 2 months. and you can see where we've increased above 10% in many of these areas in the dark blue, and in a lot of cases it's much larger than a 10% increase. But you can see where the February storms have really kind of helped. Those headwater areas tend to increase, and of course that gets routed down to the lower basin. So that's why they've gone up, even though maybe they had below average precip. There was heavier precip and significant precip in the top of the basin. San Juan Basin, minor, just minor adjustments down there, but a little bit of a decrease at some of the headwater sites there, and then in the western areas down in the Severe River Basin, a decrease. Now, I don't show the lower Colorado River Basin on this because it's a different forecast period. It changes every month, so it's difficult to be able to show that trend. We had some favorable comments. I think I asked many of you on the last, many of you commented, I guess, on the last webinar that you liked that graphical or that spatial kind of image of the water supply volume forecast better. And there were still a few that liked these evolution plots. So I don't show these for the entire basin. It just takes a lot of time. But I show them for a couple areas, those that are maybe of more interest right now. Once again, these are all on our website. And this is just the Lake Powell one. You can kind of see in the middle, that dot in the middle is the 50% exceedance value, basically what people tend to take as the forecast, what kind of guides our primary forecast number. And then on the ends, the various exceedance probability values, 10% at the top, 90% at the bottom. The official forecast for Lake Powell, 8.3 million acre feet, 116% of average. And that's also indicated by the red bar and the solid red dot in the middle. That's actually the forecast range, the official forecast. And for those of you who have not seen this graph, it's generated from our ensemble streamflow prediction model, and it is run daily. So basically, it's a kind of a raw guidance output, and then we plop on the front of it the actual official forecast. So it gives you a way to follow and see how recent storms have affected the guidance. And in February, it would have been really good to look at this. I'll show you the next one. That's the Green River at Fontenelle. You can see between the actual official forecasts, that incredible increase. If you're sitting there in the middle of February or 2 weeks in and looking at the first of the month forecast, you're like, wow, that's quite low considering what's going on. So this is kind of a way for us and for you to kind of monitor how the trend is going, and then while we are in between official forecasts. And the increase between February and March 1st in the official forecast was over 500,000 acre feet. So that's quite a significant number. And I threw one more on here just showing that, the Weber at Oakley, the guidance actually did go up some, and the forecast is following pretty close to the guidance from the model. Again, it's kind of a soil moisture issue, I think, that's keeping it from jumping right up to the average at this juncture. Next up, I kind of wanted to take a moment and talk a little bit about the impact of the spring weather. Again, you've heard us a lot of times. This is after the fact, and maybe it's like an excuse that, oh, the forecasts were so high, or we had such low runoff because April and May, or March and April were very dry months. If you can recall, especially those of you in the San Juan Basin and our southern basins, we look back, and there's a lot of years here recently where things have gone dry in the San Juan Basin, and that's why I picked this basin. But things have gone dry in March and April. I think we looked at a period of 14 years, and there was only a couple years where we actually, 2 or 3 years in there in the last 14, where we actually had above average precipitation. So, whether that's signaling a longer term permanent trend, I can't say right now, but it's something to consider. So we wanted to take a look at the Pagosa Springs forecast really briefly and kind of just show a couple scenarios from this point on what our model would suggest if this happened again. Our model will, well, first of all, let me highlight the points here. USJ, WCS are 2 snow-tell sites in the basin up above Pagosa Springs. And so these are kind of key indicators of conditions in this area. The averages for March and April are listed up here. The combined average for the upper San Juan snow-tell site is 10.4. That's how much precip it normally gets, and that's a 30-year average. Our model will, from this point forward, assume that's what we're going to get. We don't know for sure what we're going to get, so we go with climatology. In 2006, we were above it. We were about, for these sites around 155% of average for these sites combined. And in 2008, we were really dry. We were 30% of average. So the question is, what happens if either one of those scenarios repeated from this point forward, starting with today's conditions in the basin, with today's snowpack, with today's soil moisture, with today's base flows. And what we do is over here on the lower left, it says March 2nd. This is basically a forecast of the stream flow throughout our forecast period into the future. And then we pick, of course, the April-July volume out of this. So each one of these years' precipitation and temperature scenarios are fed in with today's conditions as the starting point. And you get this huge spaghetti plot, all these possibilities of the forecasts. And we end up going with the climatology, so we're kind of somewhere right in the middle of this when we decide on the forecast guidance to follow. Next up, if we highlight a couple of years, and I'm going to highlight 2006 and 2008 just to show the scenarios. 2006, if you recall, was very wet, and the model says, hey, look, if I get 155% in the next 2 months, it gives me a forecast of about 240,000 acre feet, pretty close to that. We can look back at our stats. I don't have the tables here. You don't want to look at a bunch of numbers, but basically that comes out as a 16% chance of exceeding that forecast right now. It's just unlikely. You're not going to see that too often. Same thing with 2008. If you were to go dry and get around 30 or 40% of precipitation for the next 2 months, the model suggests a number closer to 135,000 acre feet. Currently, it says about a 94% chance of exceedance. And this is the raw guidance that we look at. Again, we follow climatology. Climatology suggests around 180, 190,000 acre feet. And our official forecast went out a couple days ago of 182,000 acre feet. So that's what you see. But I guess what I want to show you here is just the range of possibilities. If the spring were to go dry and the spring were to go, wet, and it kind of concerns us a little bit because so many of the last few years in this area have gone dry. So when we do issue our forecast guidance that I just showed you on the other plots, and this is the same plot for the San Juan Basin, this 10 and 90%, the 90% is the lower red bar, and the 10% is the higher red bar. That's kind of giving you the forecast range of those possibilities, and it's pretty close to the numbers I just showed you. So definitely something that concerns us and that we need to keep an eye on if we are following that kind of a trend. So that's kind of just I don't want to get into it in a lot of detail, but that's something I want to show you. That's kind of our forecast concept of the webinar this month. So let's get into the future weather, and then I'm going to open it up for questions. We've had a progressive pattern in February, at least through mid-March. It looks like that is going to continue. This is a satellite picture taken this morning, and I've got, it's hard to see, but the outline of the western United States is over here. This number 1 is sitting right over northern Nevada, so Utah's kind of right in here where my cursor is. Wait a minute here, where my cursor is. And so the first storm is kind of moving into the area right now. We're actually getting some rain here in Salt Lake, and it is going to be moving through the primarily northern half of our area between now and the first part of the weekend. So this will translate through probably from the Gunnison Basin north, I'm thinking, is the area that will kind of see the most effect from this. And then between the two, we'll have a little drying period, a little warm up, probably Sunday, Monday. And then storm number two out here in the Pacific is likely to come through early next week and bring us another batch of precipitation. So we're in this flow where we're at least seeing some activity come through. The plus side is more precipitation, and the downside is kind of falling in areas that are already doing really well. It'd be nice to see it move south. This is the forecast for precipitation for now through Saturday. And this, if you can see this, see kind of the outline. I'm cursor right now is kind of over northern Utah, around maybe upwards to an inch again in the Green River, Wyoming range, Wind River range, Northern Bear, extending all the way down through the northern Wasatch Front. So, ½ inch to an inch in these areas. A little bit better over in the upper Yampa again, 1 to 2 inches is what forecast right now anyway. And then as you move further south into the Gunnison and parts of the Colorado River, up above Cameo, upper Gunnison Basin, maybe even as far south as the part of the Dolores, amounts in the ½ to 1 inch range. So that's kind of what we're looking, and unfortunately, not much south of there, just minor amounts. This here's a 7-day precipitation forecast from the Weather Prediction Center, kind of showing. I'd look at this more for kind of area coverage than amounts, but this would include that second storm that comes in too. But you can kind of see where the areas are that get hit, or the same areas that have been getting hit. So again, the next week does look unsettled. And then beyond that, we may get into a period where it does dry out for a little bit. Not a lot of confidence right now in the end of March, but I could see after this second storm next week getting into several days where we may dry out for a little bit. Looking at the actual long-term precipitation outlook from the Climate Prediction Center, shows kind of equal chances over most of our area for March as to whether you're going to be wetter or drier than normal. We were discussing that little above average in Arizona, and I actually think that's from the storm that came through the first part of the month. The averages for Arizona, especially for that farther south in March, are pretty low. So it doesn't take much to get above average. So I believe that's a big part why there's that bullseye over there. And then the March through May period doesn't really suggest whether it's going to be wetter or drier according to the Climate Prediction Center outlook. The spring temperature, there's a little more confidence in what they have there. This is a pattern with a milder air mass, so it's just kind of continuing, I think, what we've seen with at least from western Colorado, west and south, for March, an above average chance of above average temperatures. And then we kind of see that maybe not as widespread, but showing it through the March through May period too, at least for the Great Basin and lower Colorado, maybe into the San Juan. So in summary, we have, again, the soil moisture conditions affecting the forecasts in the various areas I discussed. The snow situation, which is quite significant in areas of Wyoming, the Yampa, areas of Colorado, and parts of the extreme northeast Great Basin and the Bear River Basin. Our forecasts much above average in those areas. We've improved. It's good to see us improve in the Weber, Provo, Six Creeks, and Bear. There's still a possibility to improve with additional precipitation. The San Juan Basin is below average, and just the fact that we've had these dry springs, it does concern us. I think if we get dry, you've kind of seen how the models suggest you would see quite a bit lower values. So we need to, we want to look, I guess, at how to maybe address that in future forecasts if we really are getting into more of a trend of drier springs. If that tends to be more the norm than not, then I think that's something we need to deal with. And then below average conditions still exist in those southern areas. So for the short-term weather, periods of showers, periods of warm, dry, but at least an active pattern. And then the latest thing was a hint of an El Nino late next summer, was it?
I think we can now.
You can now tell people. That's maybe not official, but who cares, But again, that's just a hint, and that's really late in the season. So I mean, that's not any kind of immediate impact for us right now. So just something in the long-term climate to look at. We have added a new webinar for next week for Tuesday at 11 a.m. Because of the concern about the peak flows. A lot of times we don't do our peak flow webinar till mid-April. We're going to do one next week. We'll send something out about that this afternoon on how to register for that, but it'll be on that same site that's listed here. So that's the only new webinar at this point in time, and it'll be dedicated towards the peak flows that we're anticipating. Kind of a really early guidance, early outlook of peak flows. And then those of you who knew or know, talking past tense, I'm sorry, Kevin, who know Kevin Warner, Kevin has been selected for a new position with the National Climatic Data Center group, and it's the Western Region Climate Services Director. So you'll probably still see Kevin around, but he won't be in our office anymore. I think he's going to split his time between a couple locations. But he is basically, for all purposes, out of the office now, and we're kind of picking up the slack by as a team. So you can see the list of the forecasters there, and you're more than welcome to contact Michelle, our hydrologist in charge, or any of us with any issues, especially regarding the water supply forecast. So let me unmute the.
The conference is now in talk mode.
We've unmuted the conference, and I'm going to check online for questions as well. I keep forgetting to do that. But if anybody has any questions, now would be a great time. Let's see. Let me address a couple of these online really quick. Doyle was asking, is this slide all snow? Did that get, are you still on, and did that get answered?
Yeah, that got answered a couple slides later.
Okay.
I'm not sure it was all snow or just a snow-water mix.
Oh, okay, sorry. Yeah, it's a little challenging to keep up with these when we're trying to record this. We'll have to find a better way. And then Andrew, what was, made a comment that there was around Crested Butte in that February storm, they had some rain at 12,000 feet. So, and we did notice that here in some parts of northern Utah as well. It was a very mild air mass. Those tropical air masses bring a lot of precipitation, and of course they can, because it's a warmer air mass that can hold more water in it. So that's interesting that it was that high. Any other comments or questions? And I do have the Colorado River and Green River Basin forecasters here if you want to put them on the spot. Okay. Well, I guess they're breathing a sigh of relief. I guess that covers it then. If you have any questions, oh wait, I just got another one online. Sorry. Can you clarify the inflow forecast value for Powell and other reservoirs as to whether or not there is any consideration for regulation and depletion by water users? So basically, for all these water supply forecasts, they are unregulated forecasts. So we do not take that into consideration. We put in as close to unregulated as we can, and then it's pretty much up to the users to determine what they might get by way of their regulation and such. Did that answer your question, John?
Yes, thanks.
Okay. Last chance for questions, and then we'll wrap it up till next time. Okay, if you think of any, you're more than welcome to send us an email or give us a call, and we'll be happy to address those. Thanks you all for joining.